AITA. I live in California and have been paying my rent on time and just got a notice to vacate premises within 3 days. I cannot believe this is happening. I have no idea how to process this. 1 minute, I am settling into my routine, trying to balance university, work, and life, and the next, I am staring at a 3-day notice to vacate my own home. A home I have been renting, paying for, and living in since April. A space where I have studied late into the night, where I have curled up with a book on weekends, where I have cooked meals and invited friends over, where I have lived my life without ever thinking, not even once, that it could all just vanish in an instant. And now, suddenly, it is gone. Sold out from under me like I am nothing. Like I do not even exist. I should have known something was off. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. It started with those weird notices back in June or July. I remember them arriving in the mail, stamped with ominous words about foreclosure and unpaid debts. Thick envelopes with official-looking seals, pages filled with legal jargon that made my stomach twist even though I did not fully understand what they meant. I was confused but not panicked. After all, I was not the homeowner. I was just a tenant, paying rent every month like I was supposed to. The landlord handled that stuff, not me. That was the deal. That was how renting worked. I did what seemed like the responsible thing. I forwarded them to the property management company, expecting some kind of response, some kind of reassurance that it was nothing to worry about, that it was a mistake or something they already had under control. But that response never came. Not once. No acknowledgement, no explanation, nothing. It was as if my messages had disappeared into a void, swallowed up and ignored like they had never even been sent. But I did not push. Why would I? I was naive enough to believe that, surely, if something serious was happening, they would let me know. Surely, if the house I was living in was about to be ripped out from under me, someone would have the basic decency to warn me. Surely, the property management company had a duty to inform me of something so massive, so life-altering. But no. That did not happen. Instead, my landlord, who, as it turns out, was a complete fraud, just stopped paying. Everything. The mortgage. The property taxes. Any and all financial obligations tied to the house. They pocketed the rent I was paying every month and let the whole thing fall apart in silence. No letters, no updates, no warning that my home was slipping away while they stuffed my money into their own pockets. The sheer audacity of it, the absolute selfishness, the cruelty of taking my rent knowing full well they were letting the house go into foreclosure, it makes me sick. And now, because of their negligence, I am the one suffering the consequences. I only found out when a new realty company, some investor, some faceless corporation that now apparently owns the roof over my head, dropped off the notice. No introduction, no attempt to explain, just a single piece of paper. 3 days. That is all I have been given. 3 days to leave, to uproot my entire life, to figure out where I am going to sleep, where I am going to put my belongings, how I am going to keep going to class like nothing is wrong. 3 days to process something that I did not even know was happening in the first place. I feel completely blindsided. I feel sick. I keep replaying every little detail in my head, over and over, wondering how I did not see this coming, wondering if there was anything I could have done differently. Did I miss something? Should I have questioned it more? Should I have pushed harder when I got no response? But how could I have known? My landlord never said a word. The property management company ignored me. And now, the people who bought this house at auction seem to think I am just supposed to disappear, like my life here never even existed. I have no plan. Nowhere to go. I do not even know what my rights are in a situation like this. I have been scouring the internet, reading laws and tenant rights guides that seem vague and contradictory, trying to make sense of legalese I have never had to deal with before, trying to figure out if this is even legal. Can they really just throw me out with no warning? Do I seriously only have 3 days to leave? What are my rights here? What do I even do? Update 1. First of all, thank you to everyone who gave me advice and pointed me in the right direction. I honestly felt like I was drowning in panic, like I had been thrown into the deep end with no warning, no preparation, and no idea how to keep my head above water. But after reading through so many helpful responses and doing some research, I realized something important. I was not as powerless as they wanted me to believe. I had rights. And I was not going to just roll over and let them bulldoze my life like this. The first thing I did was contact the new landlord, or, more accurately, the faceless realty company or investor who had bought my home at auction and apparently thought that meant I would quietly disappear. I made it clear that I knew my rights, that I was staying for the remainder of my lease unless they wanted to negotiate a cash-for-keys deal, and that I had already spoken with a lawyer. I told them I would be sending over my lease agreement and requested details on where to send rent. A reasonable, professional response, right? Their reaction? Full-blown, frothing-at-the-mouth aggression. They did not just refuse to acknowledge my lease, they outright claimed it was fraudulent. They said I had no legal right to be there, that my lease was invalid because the previous owner had defaulted on the mortgage, and that I needed to leave immediately. Then they took it a step further. If I did not get out, they said, they would call the police. Excuse me? That was the moment I realized this was not just incompetence or confusion. This was intimidation. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to use fear tactics to make it happen. The way they saw it, I was an inconvenience, a problem to be erased, someone they could scare into leaving before I even had the chance to fight back. But they had severely underestimated me. I was not about to let them bully me out of my own home. I immediately reached out to my university for help. I did not know what kind of resources they might have, but I figured it was worth a shot. Turns out, it was the best decision I could have made. They connected me with several local organizations that specialize in tenant rights and housing issues. Through them, I learned about my city's Eviction Protection Program, EPP, which provides free legal assistance to tenants facing unlawful eviction. I applied immediately and was matched with an attorney who specializes in tenant law. This lawyer? Absolute legend. She took one look at my situation and did not even hesitate. No uncertainty, no vague legal jargon, just straight facts. She told me exactly what was happening and exactly how we were going to handle it. According to her, this was a textbook case of an investor trying to steamroll a tenant out of a property they had just purchased, ignoring the lease, ignoring the law, and hoping I would panic and leave without realizing I had options. And she was not having any of it. The first thing she did was review my lease. It was completely valid. Just because the previous owner had defaulted on their mortgage did not mean my lease was suddenly null and void. Foreclosure does not magically erase tenant rights. The new owner had to honor my lease until it expired, or they had to negotiate a cash-for-keys deal if they wanted me to leave earlier. What they could not do was threaten me, harass me, or try to intimidate me into vacating before going through the proper legal channels. And the whole, "we'll call the police," threat? Total bluff. The police do not handle civil disputes like this. If they actually tried to call the cops on me, it would backfire spectacularly, because law enforcement would just tell them to go through the courts if they wanted me out. Which, surprise, takes way longer than 3 days. In other words, they were banking on me not knowing my rights. They were hoping I would panic and just leave. They wanted me gone not because I was doing anything wrong, but because acknowledging my lease would be inconvenient for them. They would rather have an empty house they could flip or rent out at a higher price than deal with an existing tenant who was paying a fair rate. And now that I had legal backing, they were in for a fight. My lawyer immediately sent them a formal letter outlining my rights and warning them that any further attempts to harass or intimidate me would be met with legal action. She also demanded that they provide a proper mailing address for rent payments, because if they tried to claim I was refusing to pay, that would be another easy legal win in my favor. So, now we are in full fight mode. Yeah, this is straight up illegal. They're trying to intimidate you into leaving because they don't want to deal with your lease. Now we are in full fight mode. Update 2. I cannot overstate how much of a badass my attorney is. I went into this fight feeling like I was drowning, barely keeping my head above water, scrambling to make sense of what was happening while the people trying to push me out had all the power. But she walked in like she had already won. And honestly, she had. The second she got involved, everything changed. It was like flipping a switch. No more second-guessing, no more overwhelming panic, no more feeling like I was at the mercy of people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. She took every ounce of fear I had been carrying and turned it into a weapon, something sharp and undeniable. No emotion, no panic, just cold, hard legal facts. And it was glorious. She went through everything with a level of detail that I can only describe as surgical. It was terrifying if you were on the receiving end of it. She pulled legal ownership records, combed through my lease agreement line by line, and gathered every single document tied to the property like she was building a case for a murder trial. She was not just checking things over, she was dissecting them, looking for every possible angle, every crack in their foundation, every single thing they might try to use against me. She wanted to be sure there were no surprises, no hidden clauses, no shady loopholes they could attempt to exploit. Every piece of information they thought they could use to manipulate me. She had it in her hands before they even had a chance to blink. After tearing through it all, she looked at me with complete certainty and laid it out plainly: the new landlords had no case. None. Zero. They had absolutely nothing. This was not a legal dispute. It was not some complicated gray area of the law. It was just a straight-up power move. They were trying to bully me out of my lease because honoring it was inconvenient for them. And legally, they were dead in the water. And then she did something that I can only describe as chef's kiss perfection. She called up the new landlord's attorney, and it was like watching a masterclass in controlled destruction. There was no hesitation, no wasted words, no space for negotiation or backpedaling. She laid out everything, point by point, in a way that left absolutely no room for argument. This was not a discussion. It was a dismantling. She spelled out every single reason why their threats were empty, why their position was legally indefensible, and why they were on the fast track to getting absolutely steamrolled if they did not back off immediately. The way she spoke, the sheer authority behind her words, it was clear that she was not just making demands, she was stating facts. She was not there to debate. She was there to let them know exactly how badly this would go for them if they continued pushing. And guess what? Their own attorney folded. Completely. It was almost embarrassing how quickly it happened. There was no argument, no counterpoint, no attempt to fight back. It was like they knew, right from the start, that they had no case but were just hoping I would be too scared or uninformed to push back. And the second they realized that was not going to happen, they crumbled. They agreed with everything my lawyer said, and by the time that call ended, the new landlords had no choice but to back down and agree to honor my lease. In less than a week, the entire situation flipped on its head. They went from trying to intimidate me into leaving immediately to being legally forced to accept that I was staying. It was a complete power shift, one they absolutely did not see coming. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I could finally breathe. It was like all the weight they had dumped on me, all the stress and uncertainty and fear, was lifted in an instant. I was not the one scrambling anymore. They were. And the satisfaction of knowing they had lost, knowing they had wasted their time trying to scare me into leaving only to end up being the ones who had to back down, was indescribable. That is a win, right? Well, kind of. Because while it is undeniably satisfying to know they did not get away with their illegal tactics, I cannot shake the feeling that this is not over. Just because they were forced to honor my lease now does not mean they will not try something else later. Knowing that they were willing to go this far once, what is stopping them from pulling something shady again? What happens when they realize they cannot strong-arm me out and start looking for other ways to make my life miserable? They might not be able to evict me, but there are plenty of other ways to make a tenant's life unbearable. What if they suddenly lose my rent payments and try to claim I am not paying? What if they start neglecting maintenance, letting problems pile up in hopes that I will get frustrated enough to leave on my own? What if they find some obscure legal loophole to drag me into court, just to make things difficult? I do not want to live like that. I do not want to feel like I have to watch my back constantly, waiting for the next underhanded move, the next ridiculous excuse for why they cannot uphold their responsibilities as landlords. I do not want to stay in a home that, even though I fought for my right to be here, no longer feels safe. When I first got that 3-day notice, I felt like my life was collapsing around me, like I had been shoved off a cliff with no warning and no parachute. There was this instant, gut-wrenching panic, this feeling that everything I had built, everything I had carefully balanced, my classes, my job, my entire life, was unraveling in real time, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had no plan, no idea where I was going to go, no clue how to fight back. I felt small. I felt powerless. I felt like I was at the mercy of people who did not care about me, who did not see me as a person with a life and obligations, just a problem to be erased. But now I am walking away with $7,500 in my pocket, a better apartment, and the knowledge that I completely flipped the script on the people who tried to screw me over. The people who thought they could intimidate me, who thought they could manipulate me into disappearing without a fight, who thought they could treat me like an inconvenience and make me vanish without consequence. They lost. I won. And I did not just win, I walked away in a better position than I started. After my lawyer shut them down so thoroughly it was almost embarrassing, I went back to the new landlords and let them know exactly how this was going to work. If they really wanted me out, they were going to have to pay me. They had already lost their first battle, forced to acknowledge my lease when they had spent days trying to convince me that I had no right to be there at all. They had spent all that time trying to scare me, trying to push me into leaving without realizing I had options, and they had failed. They had to know they were not going to win another round, not with my attorney in my corner. But they still tried. At first, they insulted me with a pathetic offer, $1,000 if I left in 3 days. 3 days. The same timeline they had originally tried to force on me, except this time with the added insult of a few $100s after legal fees and moving costs were factored in. The audacity of it, the absolute pettiness, was almost impressive in a way. They thought they could throw some loose change in my direction and I would jump at it, grateful for the scraps they were offering. My lawyer, quite literally, laughed. She did not even entertain the offer, just shut it down immediately and made it clear that we were not negotiating on their terms. If they wanted me out early, they were going to have to make it worth my while. What followed was a week of tense back-and-forth negotiations. The landlords acted like they had all the power, like they were doing me a favor by even considering a payout. They wanted me to believe they were being generous, that they were offering me an opportunity one should be grateful for. But my lawyer saw right through it, and so did I. They kept lowballing me, offering numbers that would barely cover a U-Haul rental, let alone a security deposit and first month's rent somewhere else. They wanted me out, but they wanted to do it cheaply, without having to acknowledge how badly they had already screwed up. They were still operating under the assumption that I was desperate, that I would cave if they just made it seem like this was my best option. But my lawyer was relentless. She kept pushing, standing firm on every counteroffer, reminding them again and again that the alternative to paying me a fair amount was dealing with me staying for the full duration of my lease. And that was not something they wanted. They had already made it clear they had no interest in having a tenant in the property. They wanted me gone so they could either flip the house, sell it, or jack up the rent for someone else. And the longer I stayed, the more of a problem I became for them. Every day that passed, they realized more and more that they were losing this battle. Eventually, they caved. I walked away with $7,500 to vacate the house within 30 days. Let me repeat that, $7,500. More money than I had ever expected to see from this situation. Enough to cover my security deposit, first month's rent, moving expenses, and then some. Enough to give me a financial cushion I never expected to have. Enough to turn what started as a nightmare into something that actually benefited me in the end. I cannot overstate how good it felt to know I was walking away on my own terms, not because I was forced out, not because I had no other choice, but because I had negotiated a deal that worked for me. I was not scrambling, not packing up my things in a panic, not feeling like I had been cheated out of something I had a right to. I was leaving because I had made the decision to leave, and I was being compensated for it. I wasted no time. The second the agreement was signed, I started looking for a new place. And I found one, a way better apartment, closer to my university, with an actual professional management company that does not operate like a scam in progress. No shady landlords, no uncertainty about whether I would have a roof over my head in a month, no waking up to find out that my home had been secretly sold out from under me. Just a fresh start in a place where I actually feel safe. I packed up, moved out, and never looked back. The real MVP here. My lawyer. She is the reason I did not get steamrolled, the reason I did not end up couch surfing or scrambling to figure out how to fight back on my own. I legit owe her my sanity. She saw exactly what was happening from day one, saw through every intimidation tactic, every lie, every attempt to push me out without consequence. She fought for me when I did not even know how to fight for myself, and she won. Not just in keeping me from being illegally evicted, but in making sure I walked away better off than I ever could have imagined. I sent her and her team a thank you gift basket with a handwritten note because she saved me,